We all know the story of Shamima Begum, the British-born woman who went to Syria as a child to join the Islamic State. She travelled there at 15 years old with two other minors, both now dead, before meeting a man who became her husband. That was about 10 days after she entered the country, Yargo Riedic. Together, they had three children who all died, and Begum and Riedic have since split up. It should be emphasised that Begum was a child when she married a Dutchman. That marriage wasn't legal under Dutch law. Despite the extraordinary nature of her case and the deluge of suffering she's experienced, her most recent child, of course, died of pneumonia weeks after being born. She remains without British citizenship and is unable to return here. That comes after a court determined the Home Secretary was justified in removing her status as a British national a long time ago now, in 2021. Now, Begum's story is deeply troubling. Three children have arguably died because of the actions of the British state, actions which, let's be honest, most people seemingly support in this country. But equally, she did join ISIS, albeit at 15. Whatever one's views, and mine are that she should be in Britain to face justice, what she did was appalling. And I do understand why someone might completely disagree with me. But here's the thing. The Begum story set a high-profile precedent. Even if you're born here, the government can remove your birthright. Citizenship is revocable. Meet Mark Bullen. He's a former police officer who grew up in Enfield and now lives in Russia with his wife and four children. As of recently, he was still a British citizen, but that's been removed. The Times has the story. It writes this. A former police officer has become the first British-born person to be stripped of citizenship over their links to Russia. Mark Bullen had his British passport revoked on national security grounds by Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary, after having worked for more than a decade at Hertfordshire Constabulary. The unusual move, normally associated with alleged terrorists and dangerous gangsters, came after Bullen was stopped by police at Luton Airport and questioned on suspicion of being involved in hostile activity on behalf of a foreign state. Bullen, 45, had his electronic devices seized and says he was asked about the 2018 Salisbury poisonings during a 4-hour interview after flying to the UK from Russia, where he now lives. It can also be revealed that during his time in the British police, Bullen met senior Russian officers and took part in a month-long exchange to St. Petersburg. His social media posts are peppered with pro-Kremlin views and anti-Ukrainian propaganda. We'll see more of that in a minute. Bullen, who achieved his, quote, lifelong dream of obtaining a Russian passport in 2022, denies any wrongdoing. The Times goes on to say this. Bullen, who grew up in Enfield, North London, was served with a citizenship deprivation order by Mahmood in October, a month after she became Home Secretary. In her letter, which Bullen has publicly shared online, Mahmood wrote, "You are being deprived of your UK nationality on the grounds that to do so is conducive to the public good." She said the evidence on which her decision was based, quote, should not be made public in the interest of national security. Citizenship removal is a power used sparingly by the government. It is most commonly associated with terrorism suspects, including Shamima Begum, the Londoner whose British passport was revoked in 2019 after she joined the Islamic State in Syria as a teenager in 2015. After finding a new job handling social media accounts for Zenit St. Petersburg, that's a football team, in 2014, Bullen would travel back to the UK once or twice a year to visit friends and relatives. In 2022, he acquired Russian citizenship, which he said, as I mentioned a moment ago, was a lifelong dream. He told that to a Russian sports website. However, it appears that his activities were being monitored by the British authorities. In November 2024, Bullen was stopped by those counter-terrorism officers at Luton Airport after flying to the UK from Russia via Turkey. And as I said, he was questioned for 4 hours under Section 4, Schedule 3 rather, of the Counter-Terrorism and Border Security Act 2019, which relates to suspected hostile state activity. Bullen has complained on X, and this is the important bit, that British officers treated him like, quote, the Stasi, East Germany's secret police. However, he has not publicly disclosed that he was stopped under Schedule 3 powers. Bullen told Sports.ru that he was questioned about the 2018 poisoning of Sergei Skripal, a former double agent, and his daughter Yulia in Salisbury by GRU operatives. What did you know about the Skripals? What about Salisbury? Nothing, he said. Who in the Russian government do you know? Nobody. Now, this all sounds very serious. gangsters, terrorists, and now a former police officer. You have to wonder, what kind of thing was Mark Bullen saying online? It must be extraordinary. Here's a post of his on X, published by The Times in that article. He's quote tweeting Volodymyr Zelensky. We told you all Ukraine were the bad guys. Ukraine are the bad guys. That's it. Passport gone. You're like Shamima Begum. You might as well join ISIS. More recently, he has championed the childcare system in Russia. This is quote tweeting Julia Harley-Brewer, slagging off school breakfasts. In Russia, our Free State nursery schools operate from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. and provide the children aged 2 to 7 breakfast, lunch, a snack, and dinner. You bastard. How dare you? And here he is responding to Bill Browder. This is a recent one. Bill Browder, finance guy who's obsessed with Russia, posted that Times article I just relayed to you. Oh, look, a nefarious evildoer promoting UK government propaganda. Browder is a thief, a fraudster, and almost certainly much worse. His view's not mine, to be clear. He made billions exploiting the suffering of the Russian people, after the fall of the USSR. He will face justice either in this life or the next. Those are his views, of course, not ours at Novara Media. I'm sure Bill Browder would disagree. This is really important. So it might seem like we're kind of joking. I read lots of information to you there, probably too much, but I would say this to right-wing listeners and viewers. I love these people. I love people that don't necessarily share our politics coming to Novara to watch our show. Many do, and listen. I would say, look, you cheered on Shamima Begum losing her citizenship. Once the state has that tool and it can use it, and it has mass popular support in using it, right? There was no uproar. You know, they didn't cost them any votes. Actually, it would cost you votes to not do it now, to reverse it. Then they're gonna use it like wildfire. They're gonna use it like, you know, a kid in a sweet shop. They won't be able to get enough of it. And I suspect if there's not an uproar over this, that will get even worse. Now, to be clear, maybe Bullen has done something bad. Maybe he is, you know, in some way embroiled with the GRU. We don't know. But Shabana Mahmood has not disclosed the reasons why because of, quote, national security. And he was born here. I mean, if he's done something illegal, he should be arrested and prosecuted and then face a punishment. But after 4 hours of questioning, he wasn't even charged with something, which makes you wonder what on earth is going on here.
It's a very good argument for a written constitution. And I think that there are many good arguments for a written constitution, in my view. This is one, maybe this is the most strident of those arguments. It seems to me to be so disturbing. And I think the only same position for anybody who cares at all about kind of progressive politics, it's so disturbing that at the whim of politicians or counterterrorism police or whatever, we don't know what the process that's going on behind the scenes is. So actually, totally murky motivations and intelligence and methods that people can have their citizenship revoked, I think is, you know, I don't love the kind of political science game of looking at the building blocks that do or don't make a liberal democracy. But if you were really looking at something that actually sets a liberal democracy backwards, if you want to think about it in those terms, surely this would be one of them. Surely this would be one of them. And in a way, you know, you said there might be good reasons why counterterrorism police are interested in him, or Shamima Begum. We know why they were interested in her, initially at least. But again, in a way, it's kind of like the Palestine action stuff.
100%.
You know? It's like, sure, there's criminal damage laws that cover this. You know, if you want to arrest people for vandalism, you arrest them under criminal damage laws, and then the jury can decide whether they acquit them or not. If, on the other hand, you want to politicize everything and use a sledgehammer to open a walnut or something because you think it's politically expedient to you, in other words, you abuse the counterterrorism apparatus, architecture that exists to do things that are completely and utterly impolitic for them to be doing, i.e., arresting people for vandalism or stuff that's covered under criminal damage law, or in this case, counterterrorism laws exist and counterterror exists and could be applied in the context of these people that are having their citizenship revoked. It seems clearly politically motivated and very, very disturbing.
Yeah, I think it's up there with the prescription of Palestine action. You know, we talked about this to the cows came home, as my mum would love to say, Palestine action. And what an extraordinary moment it is in British politics. And actually, again, why it underscores the need for a written constitution. You had, of course, hundreds of arrests last weekend. I'll repeat it. If I have a T-shirt saying, I support Palestine action, I'll be arrested. I could face 6 months in prison. If I have a T-shirt saying, I support Palestine, action is needed, that's perfectly legal. People being arrested for T-shirts saying Palestine action. It's absurd. But it's the exact same set of principles and actually individuals and policies and misreadings of policies that underpin all of it. You know, when the Terrorism Act was being debated in 2000, you had people in the House of Commons saying to the Home Secretary at the time, you know, will this be used against internal dissenters?
Right.
And maybe the guy is an internal dissenter, I don't know. By the way, if that was a Russian guy and he'd been denaturalized by Putin and lived in the UK, we would call him a dissident. A Russian dissident. He disagrees with our foreign policy. Okay, he lives in Russia. And even if you want to punish the dude, whatever, make that a criminal offense. I obviously don't think that's right. Denaturalizing someone as something so easily is terrifying, actually. It's terrifying. In the United States, as I understand it, you can't do it to somebody born in the US. It's literally impossible to do. We've created all these post-Blair, post-2000 laws, which frankly, you know, I think if they're deployed in the way they have been, if we keep on in this direction, we are not going to be a democracy. I mean, clearly you're not a democracy if you can just denaturalize somebody. There was no democratic vote. Does he have a right to appeal? How did the Home Secretary decide this? We don't know. He doesn't know. She didn't tell him. Is that a democracy? Right? So what, the Home Secretary, one day it's Priti Patel, one day it's Shabana Mahmood. They might have wildly different politics. So if you're right-wing saying, oh, it's great that this left-wing person's been denaturalized. Well, tomorrow there might be a left-wing Home Secretary and you'll be denaturalized. That's how the rule of law works. It applies to people you don't necessarily agree with. If that's how you play ball, guess what? It ain't the rule of law. We have major problems, and I agree with you. We have to have a written constitution, otherwise our political class is going to run riot with this stuff forever and a day. I'm terrified, actually, and by the way, I don't think Farage is any worse than Labour on this. I'm terrified about what a reform Home Secretary might do with this kind of legislation. Really? You know, you were born here, right?
Yep.
You know, people like you and me, and I'm not trying to be sort of dramatic about it. It's a genuine, it's plausible, right? If this is a white British guy who's a police officer in the Hertfordshire Constabulary for a decade. If it can happen to him, it can happen to anybody.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And a broader point, or maybe a more kind of a less material point, is I just think it's incredibly depressing there are people who really think that, you know, that there's something that needs to be defended in the English spirit and the English character and that kind of thing. We don't tend to want to speak like that on the left, but it is so pipsqueak. It's so incredibly depressing for a country to sink so low and to do such things. It doesn't speak well of where the country is. It doesn't speak well of its professed values. It doesn't speak well of anything. I think I suppose this is a more abstract point, but I just think that a country with a backbone and a sense of self-respect ought to deal with its problems domestically. You know, that's the kind of conservative argument for bringing Shamima Begum back, which I think, strangely, Jacob Rees-Mogg supports. Terrible man, but I guess broken clock twice a day and all that. But he's right about this. You know, yes, she was a child, but also, even if she wasn't a child, bring her back here and try her here. You know, don't do the pass the parcel with citizenship. Don't do the cowardly thing. I think as much as anything else, not as much, almost as much as anything else, I think it's incredibly cowardly for a country to do this. I mean, we ought to be really ashamed of our cowardice doing something like this.
It's like dumping somebody by text, right?
Yeah.
It's the easy way out. I don't mean to, it's kind of making it seem a little bit banal, but I mean, it's kind of similar, actually. Also, Peter Hitchens agrees with Jacob Rees-Mogg, two actual conservatives. Not that I agree with them on many other things, but on that I do. We have a comment here. I brought this up because it's very important, from @Vicky Clee, if we can get this on the screen. At least this guy, unlike Shamima, so this is in reference to this police officer, at least this guy, unlike Shamima, seems to have other citizenship. she was rendered stateless. So that's correct. He's a Russian national since 2022. He's got a wife there. He's got 4 kids. You know, he's going to be okay. It seems like he wanted to spend his life in Russia. Okay. Shamima Begum lost her citizenship in 2019. Supreme Court backed that up in 2021. And the reason why that was possible is because, of course, you can't render people stateless. That's not something you can generally do, because she married a Dutch national and therefore she could apply for Dutch citizenship. But of course, first of all, why would the Netherlands give her citizenship? Secondly, she married the guy at 15, right? So it's not a legal marriage under Dutch law. It wasn't in the Netherlands. The whole thing is utterly ridiculous. It's actually disgusting. And I agree with you. I would actually have more respect for a British government saying, we're going to make you stateless. Sorry, that's bad, it's heartless, it's illegal, but screw you, rather than pretend that the Dutch can pick up the bill, because, by the way, they can't. And she's lost 3 kids. I find that really terrible. When you read the story about that 3rd kid dying of pneumonia after a month, basically very preventable, right? We did nothing. I find it so extraordinary. That is such a stain on this country. It really is. It really is. In 100 years, people will read about that particular story and say, wow, they just let a woman who was born in the UK, her child was started to die of pneumonia in a Syrian prison cell. Wow, really? And these people thought they were advanced?